The gym went silent the moment Chuck Norris stepped through the swinging doors. Even the air seemed to pause. Sweat-drenched fighters, seasoned trainers, and die-hard martial arts fans all froze in place, eyes locked on the man whose reputation alone could make grown men nervous. Chuck's boots hit the wooden floor with measured thuds, each step carrying a weight of confidence so thick it felt almost tangible. He was here to make a statement, and everyone knew it. He scanned the crowd with a sharp gaze, noting every whisper, every shifting foot, every breath of anticipation. Then, as if the universe had narrowed to one point, he looked across the ring. There he stood, Bruce Lee. Calm. Focused. Radiating an energy that didn't need volume to be heard. The contrast was striking. Chuck's smirk curled with arrogance, the kind earned after years of victories and legendary battles, while Bruce's serene stance spoke of a quiet mastery that needed no proclamation. "You're fast," Chuck said, his voice carrying over the silent gym like a low growl. "But speed won't save you from real power." The words were meant to intimidate, to assert dominance. The crowd tensed, waiting for the legendary Bruce Lee to respond, expecting perhaps a retort or a flex of his muscles. But Bruce didn't. He simply bowed slightly, the tiniest gesture loaded with calm confidence, as if acknowledging Chuck's words without being threatened by them. The bell rang. Metal clanged sharply, echoing off the walls, and the atmosphere changed. The fight had begun, yet nothing had physically happened. Every eye followed, every heartbeat seemed louder. Chuck advanced with deliberate steps, fists clenched, ready to unleash years of training in a display of sheer power. Bruce, in contrast, barely moved, letting the world come to him. There was a strange tension in the air, a feeling that whatever happened next would not just be a fight between two men, it would be a collision of philosophies, of ego versus discipline, of arrogance versus mastery. And in less than one round, the entire world would witness a lesson that would not just be remembered for its speed or strikes, but for the undeniable truth it revealed. True power is measured not by how loud you proclaim it, but by how silently you command it. This was more than a fight. It was a lesson in humility, precision, and respect, etched forever into martial arts history. It was an invite-only exhibition match, one of those rare events whispered about in martial arts circles for years before they actually happened. No cameras were allowed. No press. No flashy lights or commercial sponsorships. Only the people who truly understood the weight of skill and discipline were present. Legendary fighters, experienced trainers, and those few fans who had earned the right to witness history in the making. The gym was packed to the rafters, yet the air was almost reverent, heavy with anticipation. Every breath seemed to be counted, every whisper magnified, every movement observed with intent. Chuck Norris exuded confidence, the kind that bordered on arrogance. Every step he took in the ring seemed choreographed for intimidation, a silent message that he was the alpha, the man to beat. He cracked his knuckles slowly, deliberately, a grin curling on his lips as he absorbed the energy of the crowd. He fed off it, the cheers, the murmurs of admiration, the tension. He believed himself untouchable, a living legend whose power was unquestionable. Every eye was on him, but he didn't notice the subtle glances Bruce Lee cast in his direction, glances that carried nothing but calm awareness. Bruce Lee, on the other hand, was the embodiment of controlled focus. He stood motionless, like water waiting for the right moment to flow. His breathing was slow, measured, his stance light yet unshakable. There was no showmanship, no posturing, only a readiness that spoke of a mind in perfect harmony with the body. A trainer standing nearby whispered to another, barely audible above the silence, "Bruce doesn't look nervous at all." And it was true. The man who had redefined martial arts wasn't sweating. His eyes weren't scanning for weakness. He was simply present, fully aware of the moment and ready to meet it with precision. Chuck's impatience began to show. He shifted from foot to foot, tapping his leg, cracking his neck, trying to fill the silence with movement. His confidence demanded a reaction, and he was determined to draw it out. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing at Bruce. "Let's see what you've got." The crowd held its breath, sensing the tension building like a tightly wound spring, ready to explode. Before the fight could begin, let me ask you, comment where you're watching from. I want to know all the martial arts fans tuning in from around the world. And if you respect the legends who trained for decades to perfect their craft, smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, rare, untold, and unforgettable, Don't show up anywhere else. Well, the referee raised his hand, signaling that the match would begin in moments. Chuck glanced around once more, taking in the audience, the trainers, the silent tension that filled the air. His smirk remained, but there was a flicker of doubt buried deep beneath the surface. Bruce Lee didn't move. He barely shifted his weight, a subtle reminder that he was ready, not to show off, but to do what he had trained for his entire life. Control the fight, control the pace, and make every movement count. It was a battle of philosophies before a single strike had been thrown. Chuck, raw strength, reputation, and ego. Bruce, precision, calm, and mastery. And while the crowd waited for the first strike, a silent lesson was already unfolding. Skill tempered with humility is far more dangerous than arrogance fueled by reputation. The tension was unbearable. Every eye tracked the smallest twitch, every mind predicted the inevitable clash. And yet, the real story was not in the punches or kicks, but in the anticipation, the contrast, and the respect, or lack thereof, that defined the two men standing in that ring. Chuck laughed loudly, a deep, resonant sound that echoed off the high ceilings of the gym. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a statement, a challenge, a declaration of dominance. "I fought the best," he said, voice carrying over the silent crowd, dripping with confidence. "You're all speed and philosophy. That won't get you far in the real world." He cracked his knuckles again, the sound sharp and almost threatening, like gunshots in the tense air. "Power beats theory. Strength beats style. Let's see if your brain can keep up with my fists." The crowd shifted in their seats. Some whispered nervously, some leaned forward in anticipation, and a few exchanged glances that said, "This is going to be historic." Chuck took a step closer to Bruce Lee, towering with his reputation, radiating raw intensity. He wanted a reaction. He craved it. And yet, across the ring, Bruce remained calm, unshaken, almost serene. There was no flinch, no tightening of fists, no defensive stance. Just a stillness that contrasted so sharply with Chuck's energy that it made the audience hold their collective breath. Finally, Bruce spoke, his voice soft but clear, slicing through the tension like a blade. "Empty your mind." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some didn't understand, but those who knew martial arts instantly recognized the depth behind the words. Empty your mind wasn't just advice. It was a philosophy, a strategy, a way of existing in the moment without attachment, without ego, without distraction. The words were not a taunt, they were a mirror. They reflected Chuck's arrogance back at him, a subtle challenge to let go of preconceptions and see the fight as it truly was. Chuck shook his head, a mix of disbelief and irritation crossing his face. He chuckled nervously, trying to regain his usual composure. "Let's see how far wisdom takes you," he said, voice lower now, edged with a hint of tension. The smirk that had dominated his expression wavered for a split second. The audience noticed. The trainers noticed. Even Chuck himself, buried deep beneath layers of pride, could feel the weight of those simple words pressing against him. The referee, sensing that the build-up had reached its peak, raised his hand, signaling the beginning of the match. The metallic clang of the bell sliced through the tension like a starter pistol. Round 1. Fight. Chuck lunged immediately, unleashing years of training, strength, and experience. His first punch was a test, a probe, fast and powerful, meant to assert control. Bruce didn't move backward. Instead, he shifted slightly, the smallest movement, almost imperceptible, letting Chuck's fist pass harmlessly by. There was no panic, no hesitation, just calm, deliberate awareness. The crowd gasped. Chuck's confidence wavered slightly, but only for a heartbeat. He tried again, faster, harder, combining punches, kicks, and rapid movements. Bruce moved through each strike like water, flowing with precision, conserving energy, never reacting out of fear or aggression. His eyes never left Chuck, but his body seemed almost relaxed, waiting for the perfect moment. Every dodge, every block, every subtle step displayed mastery refined over decades. The contrast was stark, raw power versus fluid precision, arrogance versus focus. The audience could feel it. You could almost hear the silent lesson in the air. Every strike Chuck threw was a question. Every movement Bruce made was an answer. And that answer wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, spiritual. Chuck's energy, once commanding, now collided with Bruce's calm resolve, and the gym vibrated with the intensity of the clash before a single decisive hit was landed. In that moment, the world could see that the fight wasn't only about fists or kicks. It was about understanding, control, and respect. The first round had begun, but the real lesson, the one that would echo through martial arts history, was already underway. The bell had barely finished ringing when Chuck Norris lunged forward with a surge of raw power. His movements were aggressive, almost predatory. Every punch, every swing, carried years of training, muscle memory, and the confidence of countless victories. First, a heavy punch aimed at Bruce's chest, meant to assert dominance immediately. Then another, faster, sharper, designed to test the limits of Bruce's speed. The gym seemed to vibrate with the force of Chuck's attacks. Trainers and spectators leaned forward instinctively, anticipating the impact of a blow that could level mountains. But Bruce Lee didn't move backward. He didn't sidestep. He didn't flinch or raise his guard. Instead, he moved through the attack, almost as if the air itself guided him. His body twisted with a fluid grace, redirecting the force of Chuck's strikes rather than resisting them. The audience could barely follow his motion. His speed was so precise, so controlled, that it looked like time had slowed down just to let him perform each subtle adjustment. Chuck's fists cut through space, but Bruce was already somewhere else, calm, centered, untouchable. Then, like a flash of lightning, Bruce struck. First, a crisp strike to Chuck's ribs, landing with enough force to make the air leave a sharp hiss from Chuck's lungs. Not a wild hit, not a desperate attempt. Every movement was measured, efficient, and devastatingly accurate. The crowd's gasps filled the gym, a collective intake of breath that seemed to echo from wall to wall. Chuck blinked, momentarily stunned. He had trained for decades, but this precision, this calm mastery, was something entirely different. Before Chuck could react, Bruce followed with a sweeping kick to the thigh. It wasn't a theatrical move. It wasn't designed for show. The kick landed perfectly, destabilizing Chuck's stance, forcing him to reconsider his approach. Each strike, each block, each movement from Bruce was like a puzzle piece fitting flawlessly into place, designed to teach a lesson rather than merely overpower an opponent. Then came the lightning-fast jab to the chest. So fast, so clean, so unexpected, that Chuck's eyes widened in disbelief. The strike landed without warning, almost too fast for the human eye to register. The force wasn't overwhelming, but the precision was undeniable. Chuck froze mid-movement, caught in a moment of respect and surprise. For the first time in the fight, the arrogance that had carried him so far faltered, replaced by the raw realization that he was facing a force that wasn't just physical. It was mental, spiritual, and emotional. The gym erupted into chaos. Some spectators gasped loudly. Others whispered in disbelief. Trainers muttered under their breaths, shaking their heads. Phones were raised, though most would later admit they couldn't fully capture the sheer speed and fluidity of Bruce's movements. Every eye was on the two men in the ring, but Bruce's calm, unshaken expression seemed almost otherworldly. He hadn't broken a sweat. His breathing remained steady, his focus unshaken. And yet, Chuck's energy, so forceful, so raw, now seemed almost clumsy in comparison. Chuck attempted to recover. He swung again, this time with a series of rapid punches and kicks, hoping to overwhelm Bruce with sheer volume. But Bruce's body moved with the elegance of water, flowing between attacks, redirecting energy, and using Chuck's own force against him. Every strike Chuck threw became an opportunity for Bruce to demonstrate control. Each movement from Bruce was like a silent lecture in the art of mastery. The audience could feel it, the subtle lesson embedded in every dodge, every strike, every calculated motion. Chuck's eyes darted, searching for an opening, but each moment revealed the same truth. Speed and power alone were not enough. Precision, calm, and understanding were the real weapons here. Bruce's strikes were not violent for the sake of violence. They were purposeful, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. The difference between the two fighters was not in strength, not in reputation, not in bravado, it was in mastery itself. The crowd watched in awe, mesmerized by a display that went far beyond the physical. This was a battle of philosophy, a clash of ego versus wisdom, arrogance versus humility. Chuck had entered the ring thinking he would assert dominance, but by the end of the first exchange, the lesson was unmistakable. True power is silent, measured, and precise. And in that moment, even before a decisive strike had landed, it was clear to everyone watching. Bruce Lee wasn't just winning the fight. He was redefining it. Chuck's confidence, once unshakable, was beginning to crack. After Bruce's first lightning-fast exchange, Chuck attempted to regain control, his fists moving faster, his legs swinging harder, his body fueled by raw power and sheer determination. He had always relied on strength, endurance, and the intimidation that came from decades of victories. Now, adrenaline pumping through his veins, he swung wildly, each punch and kick a desperate attempt to overwhelm Bruce Lee with force. But Bruce was already gone. Not literally vanished, of course, but his movements were so swift and precise that Chuck couldn't track him. One moment, Bruce had been in front, and the next, he was behind, positioning himself with perfect timing, exploiting every tiny opening Chuck's aggression had left behind. The crowd's eyes widened in disbelief. Some couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Others held their breath, fully aware that they were seeing something that very few had ever seen before, the flawless execution of martial mastery. Chuck threw a powerful hook aimed at Bruce's head, swinging with all the energy he could muster. But Bruce didn't block it conventionally. Instead, he redirected Chuck's force, letting the momentum carry the punch harmlessly past him. In one seamless motion, Bruce shifted, closing the distance and delivering a strike so sharp, so precise, that it landed against Chuck's torso without hesitation. The sound of impact was crisp, echoing in the gym, and Chuck's body jolted from the accuracy of the hit. Before Chuck could react, Bruce followed with a controlled sweep, low and calculated. There was no showmanship, no theatrics, just pure efficiency. Chuck's feet left the ground, his body arcing through space, and then he hit the mat with a heavy thud. Silence fell instantly, a stark contrast to the cheers and gasps that had filled the gym seconds before. Even the most seasoned trainers and fighters froze, unsure whether to speak or simply absorb the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. The audience could barely comprehend what they had witnessed. Chuck Norris, legendary, formidable, and seemingly invincible, was on the mat, humbled not by brute force but by precision, focus, and unmatched skill. It was a turning point, not just in the match, but in the story that would be told for generations. Bruce Lee had demonstrated that true mastery wasn't about power or reputation. It was about control, timing, and understanding. Now, the atmosphere in the gym was electric. Phones were raised to capture what many knew could never be replicated, yet the reality of Bruce's movements was so fast that most recordings could barely do them justice. Trainers whispered to each other, shaking their heads, murmuring, "I've never seen anyone move like that," and "This is what true skill looks like." The energy in the room shifted. What had started as a challenge driven by ego and bravado now became a lesson in humility, precision, and respect. Chuck sat up slowly, trying to catch his breath, but the look on his face had changed. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by a mixture of awe and respect. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that no amount of raw power could compensate for lack of control. Bruce Lee stood calmly, ready, but not aggressive. Every muscle in his body was relaxed yet poised, radiating confidence without arrogance. The contrast was striking, and the audience felt it deeply. Strength alone is temporary, but mastery is enduring. If this moment shocked you, comment Bruce below to show your respect for precision and skill. And don't forget to like this video if you believe true talent and discipline surpass ego every time. Hit subscribe as well, because moments like this, the kind that redefine legends, don't come around often. Oncoming fist. Chuck tried to rise fully, testing his body, his reflexes, and his pride. But Bruce didn't give him a moment to gather himself recklessly. Each subtle movement, each step forward, reminded Chuck, and the entire audience, that this wasn't about dominating for the sake of reputation. It was about understanding the rhythm, anticipating the flow, and responding with perfection. One misstep, one miscalculation, and even the strongest could fall. The turning point wasn't just the strike or the sweep, it was the lesson embedded in the action. Chuck had learned, in front of dozens of witnesses, that ego could blind even the most experienced fighter. And Bruce had proven, silently but undeniably, that respect, skill, and precision weren't just ideals, they were forces capable of humbling even the mightiest. As Chuck remained on the mat, breathing heavily, the audience realized the first round had already spoken volumes. The narrative of strength versus wisdom, arrogance versus mastery, had been written in a matter of seconds. And in that charged silence, the gym understood the truth. Greatness isn't shown through domination, it's shown through control, calm, and the ability to make every move count. Chuck Norris sat up slowly, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. His chest heaved as he drew deep, steadying breaths, trying to make sense of the sudden shift in the match. Gone was the arrogance that had driven him into the ring moments earlier. Gone was the confident smirk, the swagger that had commanded attention the second he entered. Instead, there was stunned silence within him, a rare moment of humility, a crack in the armor of a man who had never known defeat like this. For the first time, Chuck's mind began to process what had just unfolded. Skill, precision, and calm mastery had overpowered raw strength and reputation. Bruce Lee stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed yet poised, a subtle calm radiating from every movement. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't celebrating. He was simply present, waiting for Chuck to understand, waiting for the lesson to settle in. Then, with a quiet grace, Bruce extended his hand. Not aggressively. Not triumphantly. Simply, calmly, with the weight of a gesture that carried far more than the physical act. It carried respect, wisdom, and understanding. "This isn't about winning," Bruce said softly, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension of the gym like a quiet bell. "It's about understanding." Chuck looked at the outstretched hand. His instincts told him to brush it aside, to cling to pride. But his heart and mind knew otherwise. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took Bruce's hand. The handshake was firm but respectful. There was no contest in it, no challenge, just mutual recognition of skill and dedication. It was a silent acknowledgement that mastery isn't measured by victories alone. It's measured by understanding, humility, and control. "I underestimated you," Chuck admitted, his voice low but genuine. The words were heavy with respect and newfound awareness. The arrogance that had once fueled his confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet recognition of Bruce's unmatched skill and discipline. Chuck, a legend in his own right, understood that what he had just experienced was more than a fight. It was a lesson in the art of martial mastery. Bruce smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Most people do," he replied, the words carrying weight far beyond their simplicity. "Most people underestimate the quiet power of focus, the subtle strength of humility, and the devastating effectiveness of precision." It was a lesson Chuck had just learned firsthand. The gym remained silent, almost as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Spectators, trainers, and fighters all recognized that they had just witnessed a moment that transcended competition. This was a moment that would be remembered for generations, not because of the victory or defeat, but because of the lesson it carried. Ego can blind, arrogance can mislead, but mastery, when combined with humility, is undeniable. Chuck stood slowly, shaking off the last remnants of shock. The respect in his eyes was evident. He nodded toward Bruce, a silent acknowledgement that this was not just a fight, but a defining experience. In that nod, the audience saw something rare, the acknowledgement of greatness in another, the humility of a man who had always been strong but now understood the true meaning of skill. Bruce didn't speak further. There was no need. Every movement, every glance, every silent gesture had already conveyed the message. Control, precision, and understanding were far more powerful than brute force and ego. The gym seemed to exhale collectively, the tension lifting, replaced by awe and reverence. For Chuck, the lesson was clear. He had come in thinking he would assert dominance, thinking his reputation alone could intimidate, thinking strength alone could win the day. Instead, he had been shown the truth in the simplest, most profound way possible. A calm mind, controlled body, and understanding spirit can humble even the strongest of fighters. If this moment inspired you, comment "respect" below to honor the mastery. Like this video if you believe humility is true strength, and subscribe to witness more untold stories of legendary battles and life lessons. Well, Bruce and Chuck parted ways slowly, each carrying the mutual respect that only warriors of true skill can understand. And though the first round had lasted only moments, its impact would resonate for decades, a reminder to everyone watching that humility, discipline, and understanding are the cornerstones of real mastery. The lesson was complete, the silence spoke volumes, and the world had witnessed not just a fight, but the quiet, enduring power of respect. That fight never needed a second round. By the time Bruce Lee's precise strikes and controlled movements had humbled Chuck Norris, the lesson had already been delivered. It wasn't about the scoreboard, the crowd, or even who landed the hardest blow. The victory existed in something far deeper: understanding, humility, and respect. Every spectator, every trainer, every fighter in the gym had witnessed more than a clash of fists. They had witnessed a masterclass in discipline, character, and the true meaning of strength. Power without humility is weakness. It may dominate temporarily, it may inspire fear, but without self-awareness and respect, it crumbles under its own arrogance. Chuck Norris, a legend in his own right, had been reminded of this in a matter of moments. Bruce Lee had not only bested him physically, he had demonstrated that true mastery is not measured in victories or reputation but in the ability to maintain control, to act with wisdom, and to command respect silently. Skill without respect is empty. Precision, speed, and strength are meaningless if they are wielded without understanding. The most powerful strike, the fastest kick, the most flawless technique loses its value if it is not tempered by consideration and humility. Bruce Lee embodied this principle perfectly. Every movement he made was purposeful. Every strike, block, and step communicated mastery, not ego. And that is what left the gym in awe, the realization that the most profound power is subtle, quiet, and enduring. If you believe that discipline beats arrogance, that skill paired with respect is true strength, take a moment to type respect in the comments below. Let the world know you recognize the value of humility, precision, and understanding in every field of life, not just martial arts. And if this story inspired you, like this video to show your appreciation for legendary moments that teach more than any lecture ever could. Don't forget to subscribe, because there are countless untold stories of heroes, legends, and life lessons that deserve to be shared with the world. Well, the gym gradually returned to normal, but the impact of that fight lingered. Trainers whispered to each other about what they had just witnessed, students tried to mimic the subtle movements, and spectators carried the lesson with them far beyond the walls of the arena. Every detail, the calm demeanor, the precise strikes, the silent respect, etched itself into memory, serving as a reminder that greatness is often quiet, and true mastery never needs to shout to be recognized. True warriors don't need to brag. Their power isn't measured by how loudly they declare it, but by how effectively they act. Their legacy is defined by actions, not words, by precision, not posturing, by respect, not fear. Bruce Lee's movements, so controlled yet devastatingly effective, spoke volumes. Chuck Norris's humbled respect confirmed that the greatest victories are sometimes measured in the lessons learned rather than the battles won. And that is the heart of the story. A single round, a few strikes, a handful of minutes, yet the lesson will resonate for decades. Humility, discipline, respect. Three principles that elevate skill into mastery, turning great fighters into legends. The audience left inspired, the trainers reflective, and Chuck Norris himself forever changed by the encounter. So remember, it's not enough to be strong. It's not enough to be fast. It's not enough to be skilled. True greatness comes from combining ability with humility, action with wisdom, and mastery with respect. Those who understand this principle don't just succeed, they leave a legacy. If you were inspired by Bruce Lee's mastery and Chuck Norris's humility, type respect in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more legendary stories that shaped history, taught life lessons, and honored the true spirit of mastery. Folded hands. Because at the end of the day, the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest. The strongest, the most respected, and the most remembered are those whose actions speak before their words, whose discipline outshines arrogance, and whose mastery commands respect without demanding it. Fire.